Imagine buying a pet that your grandchildren will meet. These 5 reptiles are gonna live longer than you. Most pets that people buy are gonna live shorter lifespans than they do. If you buy a dog in your mid-30s, chances are you're gonna outlive that dog unless something terrible happens. If you buy a hamster for your kid who's in 3rd grade, by the time they're playing intramural basketball at school, this animal no longer exists. But with reptiles, this is different. Everybody knows that birds can live a long time, but most people still think that reptiles have shorter lifespans, and there's a good reason for that I want to get into. And I'm tailoring this video for you. The average person who watches this channel is male and 30 years old. So if you buy any of these animals at 30, chances are that it's gonna outlive you. Sorry. Average lifespan in the US for a male is about 78, so 48 years or so all of these animals live. Starting off with one you might not think of, at number 5, iguanas. Now I'm talking about green iguanas and rock iguanas and other iguanas. Iguanas are often cited as having a lifespan of 15 or 20 years, and I think that's because we just didn't know how to take care of them for the most part of their popularity. Iguanas were really popular starting from the 70s or so, 80s, really popular in the 90s, and we realized that most of them are terrible pets for most people in the mid-2000s, so we don't really keep them that much anymore. But this is good, because the people who do keep these animals are keeping them correctly because they're making them, like their pet. Like the way that you treat a dog, or anything that you respect and don't treat like a throwaway, which unfortunately people do with reptiles. There was an iguana, a blue iguana, or Grand Cayman Island iguana, so a type of cyclura, that was captured in 1950, brought to a zoo, and lived until 2004. And at the time of the capture, they thought the animal was about 15 years old. So this brings the life of this animal to over 60 years, closer to 70 years for Godzilla the blue iguana. Now, am I saying that all iguanas are gonna live 70 years because this one lived almost 70 years? No, of course not. There's outliers out there. There's people who live to be 122. Or one person did. But they can definitely live 30, 40, up to 50 years with no problem if you're giving them good husbandry. And the reason we haven't seen that for the most part is because reptiles being commonly kept and almost accepted rather than being an outcast if you kept one, that's pretty new. And UVB light is something that a lot of us never understood, or maybe still don't. I make videos like this one here to help you. And diet and everything else that makes an iguana last 50 years rather than lasting 20 years. And keep in mind, all of these animals can still have mortalities because of things like cancer or whatever else that you wouldn't even know of until you did a post-mortem. So not to say that they're immortal animals and all of them will last this long, but iguanas, including green iguanas, can absolutely last up to 50 years, or maybe even longer, so up to 70 years, let's say. And I predict all of these reptiles on the list are going to have longer lifespans moving forward than they used to, just simply because we take much better care of them now than we did in the 80s, 90s, and before that. Number 4, you didn't expect for sure, ball pythons. Ball pythons, if you look it up, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, that's what you're going to see. And if you started to look up the lifespan of ball pythons when I started making videos in 2019, it was always 10 to 12 years. 10 to 12 years was like the standard, maybe 15 years. It's just not true. I have a few ball pythons that are older than 12 years old right now. I don't have any that are 30, but I know of people who do, and there's one very famous case from 2020 at the St. Louis Zoo, and I'll read this because the name of this python is ball python 361003. So this is not a research specimen, but a ball python that was in the St. Louis Zoo, and at 62 years old, she had a clutch of eggs. The weird part about this is she didn't have a male, so there was no male intervention, which means that's parthenogenesis. Essentially making clones of herself. I think it was 7 eggs in this clutch, one of them hatched, which means there is a living specimen of this animal, which unfortunately passed away in 2021, meaning that a 63-year-old ball python was confirmed as living. And there's a bunch of stories of snakes much older, but this one is actually confirmed. I'm not saying your ball python's gonna live 63 years, but if you were to buy a ball python in your mid-30s, let's say, for even if it's for one of your kids or just as a family pet, the chances are you are going to be very old before this thing dies. Setting up your ball python for success is what's going to ensure they have a very long lifespan, namely diet and the way that they're kept. So if you're feeding your ball python a appropriate sized rat once a week every 14 days, and then you're giving it the best environment to live in, that's how you get a 50-year-old ball python or maybe even older. Especially this month, thanks to chewy.com who's sponsoring today's episode, if you buy Rodent Pro, so you buy your feed of rodents frozen thawed directly to your door, we're gonna give you 20% off on select substrates. All you have to do is use code substrate20. These are the building blocks. What your animal eats, I mean, you are what you eat, kind of, which is kind of true for Pikachu because Pikachu is a rodent and Pikachu is a Pikachu. And ball pythons are mostly on the ground, so they're gonna be touching that substrate, and that's why I love things like Reptiles Chip and a bunch of other ones that you can get for 20% off. So feed your snakes the best and keep them on the best bedding, and you can do that at chewy.com. Number 3, the obvious one, let's get it out of the way. Tortoises. Now, obviously, this is a pet reptile list. So there are Aldabra tortoises and Galapagos tortoises that have lived 150 plus years. However, if we're talking about pet reptiles and the ones that you could possibly keep as really good pets, most people, if you live in a warm environment, can keep them outside, can keep sulcatas or leopard tortoises, and those have been known to get over 70 to 100 years old. Having a 100-year-old, well, that's still pretty rare, but a 70-year-old tortoise of those species is pretty darn common. And unless you're buying the animal when you're 10 years old, these are definitely gonna outlive you if they have a true lifespan and don't get sick or anything like that, and you give them proper husbandry. The problem we see with a lot of tortoise species, including the ones we're about to talk about, is most people don't give them the proper care. Tortoises are tricky animals because if you don't give them the right diet, humidity, and lighting, which really isn't that tricky to do, they're gonna have issues with their shell, and if you have issues with your bones, which is what that is, then you're not gonna live to your full potential. Living with abnormalities in your bones makes things much more difficult. I've got scoliosis, my spine's all kinkity-kinked. It makes things a little bit more difficult, and it's possible I don't have the longest lifespan of an average person, and it's the same thing if your animal has something wrong with their bones. That's like the foundation. It keeps your meat vehicle all intact. Bones are pretty important, and a shell of a tortoise is pretty important too. Leopards and sulcatas are pretty big, so even if you want something like a Mediterranean tortoise of some sort or a redfoot tortoise, which is what I love, those can live over 50 years, no problem. I've got one now that's over 30 years old, this big one that you see right here. And I know that because the person who had this tortoise died, and the wife didn't want to keep the tortoise, so gave it to the reptile shop, and that's how I got the tortoise. So I know for sure over 30 years old this animal is. And even so, a 30-year-old tortoise, that means that this tortoise has another 40 plus years of life. The issue is going to be care. Are you caring for the animal correctly? That is what is going to dictate if your animal lives longer than the Wikipedia expected timeline. If you Google how long does a tortoise live, it just keeps getting older and older, but it used to say 20 to 30 years, which is crazy because we know these animals can live very, very long lifespans. And of course, there are turtles and tortoises that have shorter lifespans, so don't think I want a tortoise, but I don't want it to outlive me. There are other options out there. Number 2, boas. This might come as a surprise, or maybe not. Boas have been living very long lifespans, even with poor care, since the 70s and 80s. There's lots of anecdotal, of course, not confirmed, animals that have been over 40 years old from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Boa constrictors, meaning the common boas, boa imperator, boa constrictor, even the subspecies of them, those animals are gonna last very long in comparison to, you know, a gerbil or a goldfish or whatever else you might buy your kid. Although maybe you probably shouldn't be buying your kid a full-size boa constrictor, but if you want to buy one for yourself, it might outlive you. There's at least 2 confirmed cases, one from the London Zoo of a 40-plus-year-old boa constrictor. This is an animal, I believe, that was caught, so we don't actually know how old it was before it got to the zoo, but it lived 40 years in the zoo. And there was another one in St. Louis named Popeye, and that animal lasted at least 40 years. I'm a little fuzzy if it was captive or not, but at least 40 years in captivity. So if you get one when you're 30, right, which is what we're doing, basing this video on, then you're gonna be 70 when the animal dies. And at that point, you're probably gonna need help with a 10-foot animal anyway. So it doesn't totally fit. I mean, you might, hopefully, are gonna live longer than this animal, but still, 40 years for a snake is kind of crazy. And now that we have proper care and people are keeping their boas in big, tall enclosures and they're allowed to use their body, because boas are semi-arboreal and most people don't give them the option to use your body. And as you get older as an animal, just like a human, if you don't use it, you lose it. So I'm interested to see these boas that are kept in, 6-foot tall enclosures, 6 feet, and they can be climbing and using their musculature. I'm gonna guess those animals last a lot longer than we used to see, especially with boa constrictors. And number one, instead of doing just one animal here, I wanna round up all the other species that last a really long time, maybe less than 48 years, but you probably don't know. Such as big pythons, reticulated pythons, and Burmese pythons, of course, being the commonly kept species, which can last 30 plus years all the time. Now, I say all the time, meaning there's been several documented cases, and of course more anecdotal cases as well, of big pythons leading the way in terms of age. Which I hope is true, because Burmese pythons are one of my favorite animals, and it'd be cool to see them last a really long time. One I didn't expect is Leachianus geckos. I didn't expect geckos to be on this list at all. Apparently, Leachianus geckos can last 20 to 30 years. There's a few anecdotal, but of course one documented case of a Leachianus gecko lasting over 25 years, which is pretty cool, because geckos generally don't live that long, or that's what I thought anyway. Tokay geckos are in there too, up to 20 years, which is still a pretty long lifespan for a pet, especially a tokay gecko that, you probably might need 20 years to tame one down to be able to sit there like this. And then the ones that aren't pets. Crocodilians can last over 100 years. Big tortoises last over 100 years. Tuataras, which obviously none of us can keep, will last well over 100 years, some saying up to 200 years. But if you want something shorter lifespan, there's lots of those too. There's chameleons that last a year to 3 years, for example, and anoles don't last that long. If you want to get a reptile, don't worry. You don't have to get one that lasts forever. Most of them don't.